Hello world, welcome. I hope you are having a fantastic Monday night. And today we are going to be talking about craft in the real world, rethinking fiction, writing, and workshopping. It's a novel by Matthew Salesses, and I'm here with a couple of my friends from SCD 392. We have...
Hey, this is Hannah.
Hi, this is Sarah.
And this is Nick.
Right, and I'm Kirsten, and we're going to be sharing our thoughts kind of on the book, what we think we can apply in our classrooms, and more. So, who would like to start?
I think we should start with first impressions, like how we felt about the book going in immediately. Yes, Nick?
Sure. Going into the book, I think there were a lot of good thoughts, especially on diversification in the classroom and understanding that the audience is important, knowing about the cultural background of an audience member and how that can affect the perception of a story. That your background, something obvious to a certain member is not obvious to other members. And I think that's important that he made note of that. I also think that the workshop things at the end of the book were incredibly important and salient for if you were going to teach a creative writing classroom. I think this is an important book for that. I'm going to build off that.
Yeah, I also think that the exercises in the back of the book towards the workshop is very important. And he does make a lot of good notes on the workshops, but I'm curious to what grade level he wants to imply the workshops into. I wasn't sure if it was college level, undergrad, or graduate, or if it was more centered towards high school. I was kind of confused on that point, whether they were applicable to lower academic status or higher.
I would agree with that. I think that this book has a lot of great ideas, but the theory can be very complex when you're reading it. Especially for like an audience member like me, I don't know that much about like fiction writing workshops. So going into this, I kind of went in blind. And I don't know if I could really see this being put into practice at a high school level, but definitely at a college setting. I also want to go back to Nick's point, talking about kind of what initial thoughts coming from the book. Something I really liked about this book is how they set up this idea of pure craft. And they're saying that's just a total sham, a total lie. The idea that craft is kind of like this one singular idea. It doesn't exactly exist. So to pull a quote from the reading, Matthew writes that reading and writing are not done in a vacuum. What people read and write affects how they act in the world. If writers really believe that art is important to actual life, then the responsibilities of actual life are the responsibilities of art. And I think that was a really interesting part that he brought up.
Yeah. Awesome. Off to a really great start, you guys. I think I totally agree with a lot of ways he goes about kind of starting his book with a lot of theory and kind of restating certain points about how to use it in a classroom. And I felt like I wasn't completely invested or really understood what he was saying until we got to the workshops. And then I felt completely invested in everything because there were so many inventive ideas. There was so much talk of constructing a story like through certain arcs and using certain things that we've all heard for years, like characters, plot, time, everything, kind of using that to create a story and then growing off of that through different ideas, kind of in general. And then there's the idea, like Hannah, you were saying, craft versus pure craft and what that really means to him. And I don't know about you guys, I hadn't heard that before until I had read this book. Does anybody would ever think of using that in a classroom or think about the idea of talking about craft versus pure craft with their classroom?
I think pure craft is a lie because we constantly see, I read a book by Stephen King once. I think it was It.
Oh, I love
where,
King.
Yeah, that book is controversial. But
That book is wild.
I think it was, no, it wasn't It. It was the other half, or the dark half, where the main character is an author, and the main character is in a creative writing course early in his career, and is writing just for pure entertainment horror stories. And the proctor of the course kept shutting him down because he kept reading it as a political or a certain belief from his white perspective, basically. And the fact that pure craft, which Matthew Salesses says is a lie, from pure craft, you're always looking at it, everything is sort of fluid and the same, no matter who the writer is. It's not, because there is no pure reason to write. And the character in the story that I'm talking about went his own way and got published and did everything because he said the whole class responded, this is a political story. It's not a political story. The story is the author's interpretation, but also the reader's interpretation, and that's fluid over time. Things change over time. Perspective paradigms change over time. And so that was my reaction when I read the book, is that there is no such thing as a uniform way of writing, or else everyone would have this thing figured out. And, no one has it figured out.
I love that. That's interesting that you bring up the influences of like other genres or writers or something and how they use it and argue to whether pure craft is kind of real or not. And I was thinking about how I would go about teaching it in a classroom, and I think I'm definitely siding with your side more, hearing that it's not really a real thing, it's more of a false idea, but taking certain pieces of what he kind of says there, I think could have a lot of value in a classroom if we're trying to like hype him up a little more. That I think there are certain things in his text that really are worth sharing.
I would agree with that. So to go off of that, so for example, one of the sections that I felt the most like, kind of on, like I really liked some of the points, and then I also really hated some of the points, was redefining craft terms and kind of taking these terms that we kind of already know, like character arc and story arc, and kind of redefining them in a way that fits this idea of craft as kind of this really kind of broad, obscure, giant concept that could fit into people's lives and be interpreted in different ways. Though I would like to talk about some parts that I was a bit confused on, just because there were some definitions that were kind of weirdly stated. Yeah.
Kind of redundant and also vague.
One part in particular, if you go to redefining terms in that chapter, he talks a lot about like relatability, believability, and vulnerability. And specifically, I remember him talking about how relatability, which is how the characters are presented to the implied reader, was like a bad thing, because it shouldn't matter if a story is relatable or not, because craft is this wonderful, beautiful, major thing, and it doesn't matter if it's relatable or not, but at the same time, it does. He doesn't really make a clear distinction. He doesn't say whether it's quote-unquote good or bad, which was, as a reader, kind of confusing. I'm not sure what he would want me to do with that when approaching a classroom.
I totally agree in that the idea of constructing a character based off of those three words, I think that was something that really stuck with me. That I took the relatability, believability, vulnerability kind of thing, and using that to also construct like more of a setting or the world around them, and then get the audience to feel more invested kind of in the world. Because writing fiction, a lot of the time, it's not all based on like creation itself. You're not creating, there are some authors like J.K. Rowling would create an entire world or something outside our own, but a lot of authors take pieces from the world too, which I think is really neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I take a little confusion with the thought of there is no pure craft, no pure thing, and then this is what a character is relatable and believable. Really, because I'm sure there are exceptions to that.
It's like contradictory.
Yeah, because I've read books where a character isn't relatable at all. I mean, I guess a little bit, but the book pops to my head is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That man is
That's
insane.
a good one.
That man is insane. I don't
Can't relate to
him at all. And it's not believable at all. And I wouldn't say he's vulnerable at all. But I love that book, and it gets to the point where I feel like the more we try to define what steps you have to do to create a good story, the more we see people break that. So maybe we shouldn't try to define it. Maybe we should just try to define good writing. And maybe that is what he's trying to do. But I feel like when he goes to define a character, he is going back on that, if that makes sense.
No, there was definitely a lot of contradictions, and not even just with that part. So it further into the book, he has a section called The Reader versus People of Color, and also a section called Who is at the Center of the Workshop and Who Should Be. And in both of these, he's kind of saying that the author, the person who creates these pieces, should always be at the center. And I do understand where he's coming from as like a creative writer and somebody who's kind of approaching writing in a more kind of theoretical way, in a very loose, more artistic way. But I feel like it's kind of difficult to say that the author should be the only one at the center, because I feel like the readers play such an important role in this whole literary thing as well. I mean, even in our classes, in our college classes, we're talking about every single perspective. That's just rhetoric there. And if you don't take the audience into account. It's kind of like missing this really important component of how a piece of work could be interpreted.
No, I completely agree. Readers are the more important aspect to me because even separating the famous point of separating the artist from the art, that kind of stuff, and even separating reader response theory, you can write whatever you want, but what ultimately matters is how what you wrote is interpreted, you know. And you know, there are many interpretations of some works. I know in my other course I'm doing the Metamorphosis, which is a very high interpretation. There are many different interpretations, but none of them are invalid if they are defended well. And so, while the author is important, their voice, the reader is just as important for the story. The reader is the one who builds the story, really. I mean, the author puts the words out for you to construct, but the reader is the one who ultimately takes those pieces and builds it for themselves. And to invalidate what a reader feels from what you write, it doesn't feel right to me. I feel like the reader is extremely important in the authorship of a story.
I'd agree with that. I think if you don't take into account the interpretation of the reader, you're not going to understand necessarily what you're even writing half of the time. So, okay, something that he wrote in his book that I thought was interesting was that he said that to silence the author is to willingly misinterpret the author. It is to insist that she must write to the workshop. A useful workshop considers who the reader is for each particular writer and therefore approaches each particular story on its own terms. And the danger is not a single style, it's a single audience. My thing is that as a writer, and as just like a person in general, you're never going to have a single audience. I think that's just wishful thinking. Of course, we would all love to have that one audience who understands every single metaphor, every single idea, who understands your references, where you're coming from culturally as a person, and your beliefs, but that just is not reality. And I think it's kind of takes away from a person's like agility as a writer to not be able to write to all those different kinds of audiences. I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but
it definitely makes sense.
That's actually very difficult probably as a writer too, is trying to appeal to the largest audience possible or trying to get your points across to the largest point possible. So you guys, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts on the beginning of this. I would love to jump into the workshop section. So, because we definitely felt a lot more engaged and invested in that, and we even talked about, I think, trying some of these kind of in our classrooms as soon as we read them, is how like excited we were to read some of these in the prompts. So, would anyone like to start on their thoughts there?
Well, should we go through, maybe read what the prompt was?
Yeah.
Just give a little context. Okay, so we did 2 different like writing exercises. The first one is titled For Plot and Consequences. So you're supposed to, in 5 minutes, write as many sentences as you can that follow the following format. If she or he or they hadn't blank, blank wouldn't have blank. Then after that, you're supposed to expand the sentence into a paragraph, including a full set of actions and characters, and then expand the paragraph into a scene.
It's really awesome. Would anybody like to share their experience with that or something they have?
So I thought that having 5 minutes to write was actually a very good amount of time, and that I was able to curate about 6 sentences. So I thought it was very creative, and I haven't ever had to follow the format if she, he, they hadn't, and then blank wouldn't have before. So some of the examples that I came up with was that if she hadn't knocked on the door, she wouldn't have seen the man standing outside through her window. So I thought these were just very creative ways to get students or our own selves thinking about creative ways to incorporate stories into our workshops.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it does is it forces you to write, which is the hardest part of creative writing, is actually writing. It's not the formulating of the sentences, it's not the formulating of your story, it's doing the writing, because people get in their own heads. So when you have a 5-minute window, you are forced to write as much as you can. I know we were together, me, Hannah, and Sarah, and we were all writing like fast, you know. And then after that, then we had our starter piece. And once you have the starter piece, the rest is easy to build off. Not easy, but the rest is, you know, your framework. So now you're building off that, and then you're building off from paragraph to a scene. And so having that in a workshop to force you to write, to force you to be creative, because you have to be forced sometimes to be creative. That's when the best work happens sometimes. And I think it was a good starter.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like a lot of the times you can be stuck in like a certain setting or something for academic writing, or say if you're in a school thing and you have a certain structure, everything to format, and you're focusing so much on that you lose a lot of the creative essence. And free write is the best way to get all those kind of ideas out. And I think Matthew here uses a lot of I'm not going to say he uses a lot of structure itself, but he gives a good beginning that allows for so much creativity to just kind of pour out from there. And that is something I really admired about his exercises. And there were some really neat, vulnerable ones, if I remember, that scared us a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah, like for voice, they said to list your fears, both past and present.
Oh,
And we
heck
all
yeah.
just didn't want to do that, but
Oh,
I
God.
guess he also talks about having vulnerability in the workshop to allow people to criticize your work and give constructive feedback. So I guess that's kind of the same thing with the exercises.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's another reason why I can't see this text being used at the high school level, just
Mhm.
because,
It's very
for
vulnerable.
teenagers, they're still figuring themselves out. It would be really difficult to do something like this unless the class was extremely comfortable, unless the class environment was perfectly intact, which is not always
I was thinking
something
that.
that's guaranteed.
Yeah, I would love to be able to establish that, though. I feel like I had a class in high school that I got so comfortable with, and to be able to do exercises like that and feel comfortable and supported and really get to the meat of writing or just your inner thoughts and discovering what you can from that would be so rewarding, especially as a teacher to watch it too for students.
But it also seems like you have to establish this from the beginning of the year.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I'm not sure if you could do a unit on this in high school, or if you would have to spend the entire year kind of working through it and developing their writing.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about some parts that really stuck out to me were some of the little sections he had that were author's choice workshops, suggestions for workshops, partner-led, the really specific little ones that he had noted.
Yeah, I really like how he included a whole bunch of different type of workshops that we could use. They're not just centered on the author. They also develop the reader into it.
Does anybody have a favorite? I kind of thought the hot seat was a cool concept. The pressure.
I liked the second one that we pointed out to do. It's 4 point of view, where you write a scene about something minor that happened to you this week, but you write it in third person. And then you move the story 10 years into the future, and that minor action from your scene has turned into an extremely moment for whatever character you've written.
Like a butterfly effect type of story.
Yeah, I love those. I just think it's so interesting to take it from such different perspectives. It's something that I personally as a writer don't normally do. So the exercise was really fun for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I do have a bigger question for you guys. If you could implement any of these, or maybe something of your own that you came up with a writing workshop while reading this, what would you do in a costume?
I think a big thing is variety. I don't think you can do the same workshop all year and expect to get consistent results, which is why this book is so valuable to me, especially the latter portion, because there are so many different types of workshops to keep your students thinking, to keep them analyzing their writing from a different point of view, to keep them, because when you get comfortable, you don't grow. That's a big thing that I believe in. And so, the hot seat you mentioned, I know there was the one where it was you just constantly ask questions. You don't criticize. You just say, well, what if this happened instead of that? If you just constantly mixing it up and catching your students off guard. You gotta catch your students off guard. That's what I believe. If you are, I know I already said it, but if you're comfortable, you are not growing to your maximum potential, and you have to, in a creative writing course, push them to grow to their potential.
Yeah. Love that. Anyone else?
I would implement on the 4 things to grade section, he talks about workshop self-reflections, and I think that's really important to self-reflect on what went right in your writing and what went wrong and what other people say about it, so you can tell what was not particularly helpful or what was, and then you can directly start that revision process right afterwards.
Yeah, I like that one too. So I would agree with the variety thing, Nick, that you were talking about earlier, just adding in a bunch of different ones. In particular, I really like the revision exercises that Matthew has lined out. I think they ask some really important questions that every writer should be asking themselves as they're writing something. So, for example, the 4th point says to answer for yourself the following foundational questions. So some of the questions are, whom are you writing for? What is the story about? What is the central complication? How does the protagonist eventually change or fail to change? Or how does the world change or fail to change? And I feel like sometimes these like little basic seemingly questions are the ones that we often like sometimes look over, especially when you're writing bigger, longer creative pieces. So I would definitely implement a lot of the revision exercises he has.
Yeah, I love that. I can attest to that, actually. I'm taking a creative writing course right now, and a lot of our beginning exercises and stuff goes along with the ideas of, like, how do we build this based on questions? Every question we can answer about the main character, following, like, all the way to the day they were born to now. How's their life been, their upbringing? Oh my gosh, just everything. And one that really stuck out to me, too, is the idea of writing the stakes. What are the stakes of this piece? How are you going to get the reader to really care about this character or the story and what you're writing? And, yeah, implementing all those and trying to answer every question, I think, even the uncomfortable ones. So that's awesome. Okay, so we're just about to wrap this up, I think. I have one final question for you, and I think it would be if we could talk about if there's anything you'd like to say to Matthew about his book. Anything at all.
I wish you would be more concise.
Yeah.
And straightforward. Just say what you want to say. Yeah, and especially, I'm not exactly sure the audience of this book, like he always talks about, you know, the audience and the reader. But if it is for teachers, then why don't you just be concise?
I would agree. Mr. Salas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I love your workshop content in this book. I really do. I think it's amazing. I think you clearly know what you're talking about in terms of creative writing progression and student involvement. I just believe that the first 150 or so pages, you're going to lose people because it could be 20 pages. And it's very important content. I don't want to downplay the content. I wanted to get to your workshop content, and I felt like I was reading the same things over and over again. And it's important. It's not like it wasn't important. It just was overstated, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's my only criticism of the book.
Yeah, a lot of repeated concepts that could have
Really?
been summed up in less words.
Going off of that, though, the idea of, like, getting the workshop content quicker, how neat would be actually if they included more real-life examples, if we had student examples in the book, because I know I love definitely like seeing that kind of theory in practice over the book. Hannah, you?
Yeah, I would agree with the points you all made. In particular, I remember reading at the very beginning of the book, in the preface, Salas notes that the book is not written in chronological order, which, like, I get it. Like, I'm down for a creative challenge every now and then. I respect that. But as a reader and somebody who's trying to become a teacher who would like to use these ideas and these theories in practice, it'd be a lot easier if this book was in chronological order. But, you know, you do you, Matthew. I mean, I can't judge the man. Go off.
He's got a book published.
I mean,
he has a book published.
Book published.
He's got a pop on Twitter.
I know.
And he does have a syllabus examples for us, so I guess as teachers, that is nice to look at.
No,
to
everything's
see.
here. It's just the order and
the order was a little much for me.
Yes.
It's a very well-written book.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me and sharing your thoughts on everything. Yes, claps all around. Thank you, Dr. Schmidt, for letting us use your office to record this podcast.
Shout out to Dr. Schmidt for being a real one.
And to close off for tonight, I think I'd just like to end with a little quote that I was thinking about when Nick was talking. So I think we can all agree, as teachers, that our life begins at the end of our comfort zone. And I hope we all live by that and learn to teach like that someday. So
Snaps to that.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.